Yeah, two catcher leagues, especially like I honestly haven't done too many auctions. So like the only thing that I have is I'm in AL Tout Wars, and that's even crazier because that's a two catcher league. It's only 12 teams, but it's AL only, and you get those dollar catchers, and those guys barely even play. So I think even in that format, I do think that a lot of guys kind of undervalue the catcher spot in those even deeper leagues because you are literally getting like zero production if you're spending a buck or two on an only league second catcher, and that really sets you back over the full season.
Yeah, no, I think two catcher leagues people do, especially in an auction, people do undervalue. As far as the one catcher, the reason why you shouldn't take a catcher early is because you're going to have smarter people, or I'm not going to say smarter, but other people in the league take catchers the last round. If you think about it, the gap between, we talked about, it's all relative value. If you're drafting a catcher where you think they should go, but everybody else is saying, screw it, I'm just going to go last round, that's a huge value difference. It's a huge round difference. The difference between your catcher in the one league that you're going to get at the last round and anybody but Real Muto probably is not worth that much of a gap. Right? You're not going to get that much production by getting the third best catcher in baseball than the 10th. So it's not worth taking a shot so early, being that people are waiting to the last time. That's really the reason behind it. Ruvain, let's ask you first on this one. JT Realmuto, I just mentioned him, is the top catcher. Now, we know there's an injury issue with him. Maybe you can talk about that. But the question is, his he has a high price tag. Is it worth spending on it, even if it's, he's a legitimate good player? He obviously is the player of the position that is most worth to take. But is he drafting too high? Is it also worth the risk? Because let's say he gets injured. In a two-catcher, 15-team league, you're dropping from Real Muto to nobody, and that money is out the window, and it's a crazy value loss. So is Real Muto too risky? Is his price too high? And what is his injury status?
Well, his injury status is that he did have a fracture in his thumb. They're going to supposedly he's going to be in a brace for about 2 weeks. And then hopefully he said he should be ready for opening day, which is not out of the realm of possibility because it is still only February. So I'm not too concerned about that. As for the risk of where people are taking Real Muto, he's going in the third round, fourth round, that range right now. Other players who are going that range, Jose Abreu, Whit Merrifield, Rafael Devers. Wouldn't you want to spend more capital on those guys who play close to 150 plus games every year as opposed to a catcher who I mentioned before may not play that many games? Plus, you have the injury risk. And remember, JT Realmuto was injured last year. He's getting up in age, which is also one of the reasons why I didn't want the Mets to get him, because he is getting up in age, and I'm a little nervous about these aging catchers. Age. Big thing with catchers. Right now, Realmuto is 29, 30 in that range right now, but he signed a contract for 4, 5, 6 years. He's going to have almost no value. He's going to be that second catcher already when it gets to the end of his contract. But when it comes to drafting, the risk is just way too high, and I'd rather have one of the guys I mentioned instead of taking Realmuto there.
And I think people are overvaluing him for the fact that there's no NL DH this year. If there's a DH in the NL, then his off days, or a good part of his off days, can be spent still at bat. But he's going to lose that, and I think he's going to get the lion's share. But I think that the amount of at bats he's going to lose is really going to knock him out of being worth a third, fourth rounder. I just don't see the value, and I think it's really risky. If he goes kablooey, there's nobody to pick up. Right, if an outfielder, a first baseman, goes kablooey, you pick somebody off the waiver wire, they're going to get a higher percentage of the statistics than Real Muto going to the floor. Of course, it also means that why Real Muto is so valuable is because he is much better than the rest, but the risk, of course, is greater, and I don't like that trade-off. Do you agree, Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing too with Realmuto, and the DH is a great point because Realmuto played 8 out of 47 games last year. I say played in air quotes, but I mean, he was the DH in 8 out of 47 games. So that's no longer obviously an option for this season. I think we are pretty close, but it sounds like the NLDH is not going to happen. The other thing with Realmuto that I do think we haven't talked about is the speed, and that has propelled his value. He's one of the few catchers that runs and really runs successfully. He's always had a really good stolen base rate, but to kind of what Ruven was saying, like, yeah, once you start to get over 30, like speed's one of the first things, especially behind the dish, that starts to wane. So I'm not sure if the stolen base upside is there anymore. I mean, he only did get more than 10 bags just once in his career, but he's had 8, 9 as recently as 2019. So you are getting that 5 category production with pretty good playing time, but I don't think you can bank on that as a 30-year-old catcher starting to kind of go into that decline phase, and then you tack on the NLDH on top of that, and it's a tough pick for me in the third round. That said, there are a lot of people, really smart people, who really like JT Realmuto and have benefited from his production in the last few years. And if I'm kind of reading between the lines of what Ruven said, is if you were on JT Realmuto in the third round before the injury, his ADP, I've seen him go down in the 5th or 6th round. And it sounds like the injury hopefully won't affect his 2021 season if we take him at his word and he's back by opening day. So if you do subscribe to the Realmuto theory, there is a case to be made that you are getting a round or 2 discount based on the injury news. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But as of now, no, in the third round, it's a little bit too much for me, even with the injury.
Yeah, I mean, Realmuto's stock has been so on the rise since 2015. I'll read you his roto values in 15-team 5x5 format. $12, $18, $19, $25, $27, $29. The train just keeps going up and up. And I think people get caught up and they sort of see it still zooming, but at any point it can crash. He is 30. You don't expect it to crash, and I would not draft him as if to crash. But that's not to say that he is a little bit too overvalued. The one interesting thing I also want to point out is that his intra-projectional standard deviation, which means his category risk or his profile risk, how different his 5x5 category components are different from each other, is the lowest risk in all of fantasy baseball. He is the most even categorically all over the place of any single player. I like those kind of players because it's many paths to value. So he'll steal a bit less, he'll probably hit another homer or another run or another RBI, or it doesn't matter if he's dinged in any one category is not a big impact to your overall total. You're not counting on him for something more than any other category, is what standard deviation projects, and he is the lowest. So that is a point in his favor. Great profile, but risky, and who the heck knows on that, and I think people are just pushing up way too much, and as Ruven said, passing on some very bankable players elsewhere. Let's switch a little bit to utility-only players, and the biggest question we always get is, should you save a utility slot, not clog the utility slot with a utility-only player? Do you think that players are undervalued because people don't want to take utility players for that reason, and therefore, because of that, the price gets depressed? So there's often perceived value in drafting utility players, and certainly if you've grabbed Nelson Cruz in any of the last decade of years, you've been pretty happy every single year, and I'm sure you will be for the next 10 years until he turns 50. What are your thoughts? Are people doing it wrong at utility?
I mean, I think from a strictly valuation standpoint, I mean, yeah, these utility guys, especially, I mean, the really good ones like your Nelson Cruz or Chris Davis with a K in his prime, from a strict valuation standpoint, I mean, yeah, those guys are being undervalued. But obviously the rub is that quote unquote clogging of the utility slot. How much is, and Ariel, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that. I mean, how much is that quantifiable? How much is that worth? To not have that utility spot available to you, especially, and I ran into this last year a lot because I am kind of a Nelson Cruz guy. I always kind of grab him up when I can. But in COVID years, it really did hurt more than previously because there were so many games being canceled and contact tracing and things like that you really needed to scramble a lot of weeks to field a lineup. And having someone in that utility spot did, for me, a few weeks last year, caused some headaches, just not being able to move the pieces around the way that I could. Normally in non-COVID times, it's not that big of a deal. And I try and kind of, if I do go a utility guy, I will try and build around and prioritize some of the multi-position eligible guys even more than I normally would, just to kind of counteract that from a roster flexibility standpoint. But with COVID around it, and not to get too far off, but I fully expect we're going to have some of those similar headaches, at least in the first half of 2021. It for me was a bigger problem than it has been in years past, having that utility slot filled up. So again, interested to see, Ariel, if you've been able to quantify that, but I think it does make a difference when you're trying to field a squad with so many guys and teams not playing in schedules in flux like they were last year.
So the exact answer is that the perceived market discount for utility players is roughly $3 to $4 on average in a 5x5 15-team mix setting. So, on average, if you pay for any player, you're going to get that $3 to $4 discount. And, of course, you don't need a utility player. Like in a catcher situation, that market premium counts because you need to get a catcher or two. So it's okay to pay it. Here, you don't even need the utility slot guy, and they're giving you a market discount. It's almost like a win-win to me. I think actually, and maybe I'm wrong here, that because there's now more multi-positional players than ever, right? We love those multi-positional players, and there is more than ever. If you look at the second base pool, like half the pool are people that play in other positions as well. If you think about it that way, because there's many more multi-positional players, there are more opportunities to move people around. I don't think that utility clogging up or having a utility-only guy is as hurtful as usual, because a lot of the guys who play second base anyways play elsewhere, and so you can move them around. I think that the $4 market discount is too much. To me, a multi-positional player is probably about a $1. You should pay $1 over his price on the average, but you're getting a lot more than that on the discount on the utility slot. So I think people are unfair and taking too much. Do you agree, Ruvain?
I think it depends on the strategy coming into the draft. If you want to say, okay, you know what, I'm going to bulk up on speed, I'm going to spend all my major capital on speed guys, and you just need power guys, and you know you're going to get these utility guys at a discount, you're talking about guys who hit for power. You're talking about Yordan Alvarez. You're talking about Framil Reyes. Nelson Cruz, Jorge Soler, all these guys are big power guys. So if you need power and you want to boost up and you know you're going to have space because you have roster flexibility elsewhere and you have stolen bases elsewhere, then that's the way to go. And I think they're undervalued. I think they were undervalued in the days of David Ortiz. Nobody wanted him in some of the drafts I was in. He kept dropping and dropping, and I'm saying, why is he dropping? He hit so well. And way back in the day, Edgar Martinez, he hit for average, for power, for RBIs. He had everything, but he was DH only. And you know what? If your roster can fit it and it makes sense, then it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I would not personally in a draft or auction say that, well, I just don't want the flexibility. I have to have the flexibility. I can't take a utility guy. I think if the guy has a nice bargain and it would fit into your usual bargain at the price point, I see no reason to grab the player right away. I just don't see it. Yeah, you agree, Ryan?
Ruven brought up a great point in that oftentimes, these DHs are DHs for a reason, right? They're not the most athletic, fast guys in the world. So it does have to kind of fit your roster build, not only from a position flexibility standpoint, which I kind of talked about before, but to Ruven's point, like you probably need to build some early steals to be able to make that work and make those puzzle pieces fit. But if you play your cards correctly from that aspect, you can absolutely kind of maximize that market inefficiency that you were talking about, Ariel. So just got to keep that in mind throughout your draft from a roster construction standpoint for sure.
Ruven, an entry question for you. A player that only plays DH, doesn't play the field, is he less likely to be injured in a season, or is it the same?
Depends on the player, because a lot of these DHs, sometimes we're talking about older DHs, they're going to break down anyway. So I wouldn't go according to that. But when they're in DHing, you still have to swing the bat. You still have to get on base. And if you're on first, you still have to go from first to third sometimes on singles, or they try to. And there's still a risk of injury there. No, they're not going to get injured in the field, but there's still other miscellaneous stuff. What if they have to slide into home plate and they get hurt that way? What if they're celebrating like Kendry Morales did and he jumped on home plate and he was out for the entire year? There's so many different things that can play into that. when it comes to injuries for DHs, but I think the age factor is the biggest issue when it comes to injury.
Okay, so there's no special. You get saved because